right. So remember, the idea behind fighting the virus by sheltering in place and shutting down a huge portion of the economy was that it was sort of what we had left as an available alternative, and that we had to do it despite the destruction, and the government would be here to keep businesses afloat until we came out on the other side, was the theory. It's not playing out that way. Millions of small businesses, for millions of them, the system is failing. In The Atlantic today, Annie Lowrey writes that the bridge to the post-pandemic world is collapsing. Quote, "The great small business die-off is here, and it will change the landscape of American commerce, auguring slower growth and less innovation in the future." I'm joined now by Annie Lowrey, staff writer of The Atlantic, who focuses on economic policy. Let's start, Annie, on where things stand right now in terms of small businesses in America. What is not working? What is actually happening to them in this moment?
So depending on what kind of small business we are talking about, they're largely shut down. So we are showing, we have data showing that something like 30, 40, in some cases 50% of small businesses have had catastrophic declines in their revenue and their income, in some cases even higher than that, and that they by and large have not been able to receive federal funding, or at least many of them yet. So the government thus far has made 2 large rounds of PPP loans. About 1.6 million loans went out in the first round. We're up to 2 million loans in the second. That's a huge number, but still most small businesses have not been able to access this help, and that's left them with nothing while these shutdowns have continued.
So that just, to me, I want to just stop and pause on that question for a second. I mean, the policy idea behind PPP, I think, is perfectly sound. It's being used in other places. And the biggest problem with it right now is just scale. Like, there are many, 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 many more small businesses than there are available loan dollars. And therefore, the math here is very straightforward. A lot of people are left out, and now they are basically dying, is the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an enormous program that got set up very, very quickly by the Treasury and Congress and is being run through the Small Business Administration. It's relying on our existing banking infrastructure to get this money out. And despite how big it is, right, we're talking near more than $500 billion at this point, the shutdown is so enormous and so many businesses are affected that it still isn't big enough. So right now we have $680 billion or so appropriated for this, but the estimates are indicating that businesses will need something like $1 trillion. And the longer that the shutdown goes on, the more businesses will need this money and the more money that they will need, especially since we have obligated to them to use 75% of it on payroll, which means that a lot of them have other expenses that will continue, that they won't be able to use this money to cover. And so again, as this goes on longer and longer, the gap is bigger and bigger, and we're finding it that it's smaller businesses, weaker businesses, newer businesses, and probably disproportionately minority-owned businesses that are not going to make it to the other side.
So what does that mean? I mean, I think that the disaster scenario that people think about, right, is the idea was the government would be there to sort of support people through this essentially like medically induced coma for the economy, and then revived, and the businesses would wake up and they would be there. If they don't make it, like you have this shock to the system, this temporary disruption that then becomes a permanent structural feature of the American economy. What does that mean for the economy that we have on the other side?
I think that there are at least 3 things that we are worried about that are happening as this small business die-off is taking place. So the first is that this is going to make the recession much worse because businesses will close and they will lay off those workers, and those workers will have less money to spend in their local communities, which will make their local recessions worse. And this is one way in which you are going to get that snowballing effect in which there will be less and less spending in the economy, and so it will make the recession, so we won't have a sharp bounce back, right? Instead, we'll have a long recession and a slow recovery, which is what we saw in the Great Recession. So that's the first thing. The second is that it will tilt the landscape of American business towards large businesses, those with more financial resources, and away from small businesses. And so that's not going to be good. In a lot of ways, that's going to mean that places are going to lose character. They're going to lose ingenuity. They're going to lose a lot of the businesses that we love the most. So you're going to have more big box stores and less mom and pop grocery type things. And then the third thing is that we know that that is going to have a pretty profound effect in terms of suppressing wages, meaning less productivity and innovation and less job creation in the future. This has profound macroeconomic effects, and it's not going to be good for the whole of the economy as we look 5 or 10 years down the road.
There's something really dystopian about the fact that we have seen trends towards consolidation and concentration in the American economy in the last 5 or 10 years, even longer than that. We've seen a decline in like new business starts and things like that. And now we have this accelerating, as you know in the piece, like, and you could end up with just a real sort of reign of massive dominant entities. Amazon obviously coming to mind as people are using that for a lot of retail needs that they can't get in person. That could really change the landscape of what our economy is on the other side of it.
Absolutely. And big businesses, when we are getting to the other side and the economy is starting to heal, they are going to be accessing cheap cash from the financial markets, thanks to the Fed and thanks to other central banks around the world. And they're going to be in a pretty dominant position to consolidate with one another, to move into these spaces more aggressively. This was what we saw happen after the Great Recession. And there's a suggestion that this is going to happen on an even grander scale this time. And so, some small businesses are going to make it through, and the ones that have accessed PPP money are going to face the question of whether it's enough. But broadly, we're looking at a circumstance in which the entire landscape of American commerce is going to tilt towards the big, the wealthy, those businesses that were already doing well. And that doesn't mean great things for American entrepreneurship.
All right, Annie Lauer, it was a great piece. Thank you for making some time tonight.